Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Alex Segura about two works of his, Secret Identity being the last book out, and the newly released Dick Tracy #2. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm very excited. So how long have you worked in the comic world?
Wow. How to date
I'm
yourself.
sorry, I don't want to age you, Alex.
No. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. I've been an avid comics reader since as far back as I can remember, since I first got an Archie comic at age 4. But in terms of working in comics, I started doing comic book journalism, I think around 1999. Okay. And then my first full-time job in comics as an editor at Wizard Magazine was around 2003. But as a creative, as a writer, I would say since about 2009.
Oh, perfect. Do you draw as well, or
I do draw for fun, but I'm definitely not professionally. My, just not up to snuff.
I hear you on that. I doodle, but I wouldn't even show those, to be truthful.
I think there was a time in high school when I really wanted to be an artist, and then writing just seemed like the quicker path. Not to be glib about it, but I can appreciate the work that artists put in, and so I try to be mindful of that process. Don't say a huge crowd stampedes the gate, knowing that the artist is going to have to draw every little person. So I think that's given me a little bit of empathy with the art side.
Well, and that's a very novel thing, because I don't think I'd have ever thought of that. It's like the more people there are, the more drawing there has to be. So that's something else. So
yeah, it's easy to write. There's an epic space battle with 500 ships. Like, you can write that in a sentence in a minute, and it's going to take an artist like 2 weeks to draw that.
Right? That's crazy. So let's talk a little bit about Secret Identity. So sure. In this book, it's sort of set it is set in the comic world, not sort of. It's set in the comic world. Can you give the audience an overview of what it's about?
Sure. Secret Identity is the story of Carmen Valdez, who's a queer Cuban-American woman who moves from her hometown of Miami to New York in the 70s to pursue her passion for comics. She grows up loving comics. It's a big bonding moment between her and her father. And her dream is to write comics, and she's been compiling notes and ideas for years. And she gets a job at a third-rate publisher called Triumph Comics, which, if Marvel and DC are A and B, Triumph is probably X or Y, like just way at the bottom, still eking out an existence, but definitely not top tier. And she gets a job as the secretary to the publisher, this kind of blowhard named Jeffrey Carlisle. And we learn as we meet her in the beginning of the book that she's been pitching ideas to her boss since she got there. And finally her boss says, look, I just don't have time for this. I have freelancers I have to keep fed. I have friends I want to keep paid. I have other plans for you. But obviously that's the last thing she wants to hear, because she has her own plans for herself. At the same time, she's approached by her colleague, Harvey Stern, who's a younger associate editor at the company. And he lets her know that Carlisle has told him he can write a new series for Triumph, a new series starring a female superhero, and that he needs to turn it in soon so it can meet a deadline. He offers Carmen the opportunity to co-create this character with him. But the one caveat is she has to do it anonymously, because Carlisle has basically said, I don't want any stuff from you. So it's a real fork in the road for her, because obviously she has this dream. She wants to write comics, but she also wants to be credited for the work she does. He promises her, down the line, we'll reveal that you're involved and it'll be fine. And so she does it. She pours herself into this creative process. Her and Harvey collaborate and create this amazing character called the legendary Lynx. So if you're a comics fan, the Lynx is kind of like Moon Knight or Daredevil. She's this female street-level vigilante who patrols the fictional Triumph City as the city's hero, kind of Batman-type character. So they write the scripts almost over a weekend, or Harvey does over a weekend, and she's surprised to find out that he's turned them in without her name on them, which she kind of expected, but it happens so fast that she gets a little whiplash. So she goes to confront Harvey in his apartment and discovers that he's been murdered. And as the Lynx becomes a bigger and bigger hit for Triumph Comics, she realizes that the only way she can reclaim this idea, because in comics you write your scripts ahead of time, but eventually, once you're out of scripts, you find a new writer to keep writing it. So she knows, like, eventually the company's going to hire somebody else to take over her character, this passion of hers. And so she decides she has to solve Harvey's murder to reclaim this character. And interspersed in the novel are actual pages from the comic book, The Legendary Lynx. So you'll see basically Carmen's ideas brought to life as you're reading the prose novel, The Murder Mystery of Secret Identity. So those are drawn by Sandy Gerald, who's an old friend and just super talented, just a great artist and amazing. And he perfectly evokes the 70s without feeling like, comically retro. Like, he's very much, it feels tonally like something that existed at that time. And yeah, it's very much a love letter to comics of that era, which the comic book industry of 1975 is very different from the comic book entertainment machine that is, 2024. And the New York of 1975 is very different from the New York of today, which has kind of been Disneyfied and very, it's just different.
It's a lot cleaner now than it was before.
Right. And, yeah. The president, Gerald Ford was telling New York to drop dead. Like, the city was bankrupt. Crime was at an all-time high. It was a very different time. And I wanted to really play into those differences and show an era where comics were not pop culture. Comics were like a niche thing you did or you read, and you didn't, when you worked on them, you didn't think, well, this is going to become a movie. I need to make sure I own the character. It became, this is my job and I'm going to do this. And hopefully I can write the great American novel down the line.
So I think so. This is such a great novel, and I do think, and it's mystery, and it's good. But it was so fun to see the comic interspersed in there, because it sort of reminded us of what the premise of the book was about.
Yeah.
And Carmen is certainly someone that you can root for. That's for sure. Anytime you get a protagonist that you want to root for, it's always so much more fun of a read. So, when did you switch? So have you always written novels?
Yeah, I think my comics writing and novel writing kind of started around the same time. I started writing, the first Pete Fernandez novel came out around 2013. So I had some comic stories before, but it all feels like it kind of started happening around together. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So I chatted with the romance author, Toni Herzog, at a conference one time, and she said to me that members of her family still say to her, when are you going to write a real book? Because she writes romance. Yeah. So I am curious, do you get any backlash for writing comics? Any stupid comments like that? Or hopefully not, but I never
not really. No, I think most of the time, it happened this morning as I was dropping my kids off at camp. Like, one of the other dads we had kind of the typical, like, what do you do conversation. I said, I write comics and novels. And usually my point being is that usually the response is, wow, that's cool. Like, that's fun. That seems really fun. And it is really fun. I think sometimes, I think, like you asked, like, do you draw as well? Like, that's usually the second question, but it's very rarely like, oh, you write those things. Like, and if it has happened, I've just wiped it from my memory. And
good. Well, and I never hope someone gets a negative comment like that, or a question like that. But I was really surprised, because Toni's published over 20 books, and she's like, how many do I have to publish before one of them's a real novel to some of my family? So I was like, oh, that's sort of sad.
I think that's a genre thing, and you probably know this as well as anyone. Like, what people don't realize is that authors don't really think about genre. Like, if you're thinking about trends, you're thinking about the wrong thing. Genre is a marketing thing that your publisher says, well, this is now this, so we can sell it. Not so much this is what you intended as you were writing. Like, I didn't set out and say, I'm going to write a historical mystery. I set out writing a book that I was passionate about, and it falls into those buckets kind of after the fact. But I think it is a genre stigma. Like, people are like, oh, you write mysteries, you write romance, you write comics. Those are lesser than, quote unquote, literary novels, but it's all novels to me. So
it is to me as well as an interviewer. What I'm looking for is a good author. I don't really care what the genre is. I just need a good author that I can follow what their intent was. Because I also think that a great author brings their readers into their story, and we become part of the story because we join in with the characters, and that's what makes a great novel, and that's what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned over time is that if I'm not, even with work for hire books, like if I'm writing a Star Wars novel or something that is a pre-existing universe, if I don't have an in obsession wise, if I'm not obsessed with some part of it, then that passion's not going to show through. So I always tell new writers, like, write the things you're passionate about, write the things you're obsessing over in a way only you can. Like, write the book you want to read that only you can write, because that's what's going to make it stand out. That's what, if you're thinking about trends, or if you're thinking about what's going to be hot, you're already wrong, because by the time your book comes out, it's not going to be hot anymore. It's not going to be hot.
The flavor has switched from
Yeah.
strawberry to chocolate. We've moved on to something different. Absolutely.
Well, when I wrote the PI series, every editor was like, PI novels are dead. Nobody cares about Private Eyes. And now, we've since then had a nice renaissance about PI with
Yes.
PI
Yes.
novels. And I think there's just some, you write the things you want to read. And if you like your work, or at least the idea of your works, the odds are somebody else is going to enjoy it too.
I totally agree with you. So now let's switch to Dick Tracy a little bit. So how did
Sure.
that come? How did that come to be in your universe?
This is kind of a little bit of a winding story. When I was working in house at Archie, I was one of the executives. I did a lot of marketing stuff and publishing stuff. We acquired the license to Dick Tracy to publish a comic based on this classic newspaper strip character and movie character. And I got to write it. I got to co-write it with my friend Mike Moreci. And the issue was moving along, and then suddenly we find out there's a problem, that we actually didn't have the license. There was a mistake made, and long story short, we couldn't publish the book, so
Oh,
it
sure.
went away. Fast forward to a little bit later, I was no longer at Archie, and Mike and I and our colleague Chantel reached out to Tribune, the owners of Dick Tracy, and said, is this license available now? And they said it's available, and so we acquired the license ourselves as
Oh,
creators. Yeah,
nice.
yeah, which is kind of not the usual path. Usually you go to the publisher and kind of audition as a creator, but we flipped the script a little bit. We got the license, and then we went to Mad Cave, the publisher, and said, hey, we have this Dick Tracy license. This is our take. It's kind of LA Confidential meets Dick Tracy. And they loved it, and they were on board, and we came to an agreement, and here we are. Like, we finally, after years and years of patiently waiting and kind of pecking at it, it's happening, and the response has been huge. It's been really beyond my wildest dreams.
Congratulations. That's
Oh,
fantastic. I
thank you.
noticed this number 3 is coming out this month as well.
Yeah.
Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Oh, wow. You
Yeah,
guys
we
are,
just turned in the script for number 5. So
oh, fantastic. You guys are steamrolling. I love it. So what are the biggest differences between writing Secret Identity and writing Dick Tracy? I mean, I
um,
assume on Dick Tracy you have collaborators.
yeah, I would say the big difference between just prose and comics in general is I've co-written novels, but even that process is very different. Is that comics is 100% collaborative. You're writing to the artist, and then the artist is drawing to the inker, who's then inking to the colors. Like, you're part of a rock band almost. Like, all these pieces together create hopefully a uh greater whole. And so one of the things that writing comics has taught me in terms of novel writing is, you know, being compact with language. Like, because in comics you have X amount of space on a page, X amount of words you can fit into a panel, X amount of panels you can have on a page. And, you have to be mindful of things of like page turns, how many pages are in the issue, like what's going to be the most impactful thing visually. It's really, you're thinking about the visual part, because without the artist, there's no comics. It's just a script. Whereas with novels, you are responsible for every aspect of the story. You are the director, the costume designer, the producer. Obviously there's editors and agents and beta readers that give feedback, but they're giving feedback on the completed work. With comics, especially Dick Tracy, where I'm collaborating with a co-writer, we have a creative consultant, we have a great artist, Geraldo Borges, and a great team across the board. Like, you want them to be excited as they get the script. I want the artist to look at the script and be like, I can't wait to draw this. And you want the colors to say, wow, this art is beautiful. I can't wait to like add my touches to it. So even before it gets out there, like, you have an audience of one. Like, for me, it's like, I want to send my script to Mike and I want him to like it. So we're all jazzed about it, and then we want the artist to be excited. So I think it's that collaborative nature that we're all in the trenches together, kind of jamming on this idea, that makes it different. And sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I'd rather just work by myself, and that's when you write a novel.
Well, right. Well,
Yeah,
and I think most authors who aren't in comics would say that it's sort of a solitary thing. You could actually just be in the closet with the computer, and
right.
it's just you in your own little world, and the characters that are either talking to you or you create, whichever way it comes to you. So,
Exactly.
speaking of which, so do your characters speak to you when you're writing a novel? Do you hear
Um,
their voices, or do they like wake you up in the middle of the night?
they do sometimes do their own thing. They do their own thing in a way that I love, and that's always a sign that things are going well. That you're not like over outline. I am an outliner, so I like to plot out the story, but I like to kind of plant flags and say these are where the big things happen, and then I'm going to open this cage, and the characters are going to come out and run around, and they're going to sometimes do their own thing. I know something is really clicking when I'm obsessed with it. In terms of like I'm thinking about it before I go to bed. I'm thinking about it when I take my walk. I take a long walk each day or each night just to kind of walk around and kind of think, like let the wheels turn
Hmm,
without
hmm.
having to do something. If something is filling up those spaces, and if I'm visualizing the book, I do vision boards and like Pinterest boards. Like I really like to cast actors as my characters just so I can kind of help see the story. When all that's happening, that means the engine is purring and things are moving. They don't really necessarily talk to me. I kind of just see them act out the scenes in my head, and that then gets transcribed into the novel. If I'm bumping against that and I'm kind of forcing it, then I know I need to take a breath and let them do their thing. Let them live as opposed to
Hmm.
having the plot shove them into a certain direction. I think one of the things with Secret Identity is that it's a very slow burn. It doesn't start out with explosions. Like my Pete Fernandez novels are very action heavy PI novels with a lot of pathos and character drama, but there's action. Cars explode, people get shot. Secret Identity, I think there's maybe 2 bullets fired in the whole novel, but that's by design, and that's just how the novel played itself out. And you have to be willing to ride that wave and trust the process, I think.
And I think for some of my friends who read a lot, they prefer only action.
Yeah,
As long as the book has me hooked, I don't care how long the burn is. I'm in for it. So
yeah. If I care,
yeah, precisely. I think that's just it. I think if you care about the characters, you're going to invest with them.
yeah,
So,
100%.
so what are you working on next? I mean, I know Dick Tracy's out now, but do you have a new novel in the process?
I do. I actually have 3 novels coming out
Oh,
at the
all
end of the
right,
year.
Alex, come
Yeah,
on
it's
now.
crazy. Yeah, but the most relevant one to this chat is Alter Ego, which is a follow up to Secret Identity, and I hesitate to call it a sequel because it's not. It doesn't pick up immediately after the '70s story. It does pick up immediately after the epilogue. So if you read the epilogue, which I won't spoil if you haven't read Secret Identity, the alter ego picks up immediately from there. But we have a new protagonist, Annie Bustamante, who is a former comic book artist who kind of wandered away from the industry and became a fairly successful filmmaker. Um, but on the side, she's been drawing this fan comic of this character she grew up loving. This character that was a great point of identification for her, the legendary Lynx. And so when this obscure company comes out of the woodwork and says we own these properties, we're going to relaunch the Lynx as a multimedia movie empire, she's hired to write and draw the comic. And so as she digs deeper into the project, though, she finds out that there's this dark undercurrent that may be tied into the death of one of her friends. And so it's very much the other side of the coin. It's the comic book industry today, the film industry today, entertainment, the idea of art versus commerce. But it's a much more personal story too. Annie is a parent, so we get to explore that dynamic with her and her daughter, and she's also gotten over some of her own generational trauma and her own kind of past mistakes. And that's life. The gray areas of life
Yeah. Yep.
are really fascinating to me, and I wanted to lean into that. But yeah, if you read them both, you'll definitely get more. But you don't. It's not a requirement to read Secret Identity to understand Alter Ego. In terms of other stuff, Dark Space is a sci-fi espionage book that I'm co-writing with Rob Hart, and that'll be out in October from Blackstone. And I'm writing a middle grade Encanto, the movie Encanto prequel called Nightmares and Sueños. So it talks about Bruno and why he left Casita. Um, Sorry, the future projects thing could go on, but I'm also writing Spider Society for Marvel, which is a big
Oh,
Spider Verse
wow.
adventure. Yeah, it's a comic book.
Okay.
Yeah, with all the spider heroes. I've got a question, Renee Montoya story running through some of the Batman books this summer, and some other stuff I can't talk about yet, but it's
My
been a busy,
goodness.
it's a busy
And do you
time.
have any free time?
No, I mean, I don't. I honestly, if we're being honest, I don't have free time. I have 2 young kids. I like to stay engaged with them, but I really love what I do. So this is kind of the fun part.
Wow. That's so amazing, Alex. So do you have a website or social media you'd like to share with the audience? How
I
can they
do.
find you?
Yeah, alexsegura.com. You can find everything there. You can order signed books there. You can see what's coming up, kind of stay up to date, and also sign up for my newsletter. I am not on Twitter. I'm not really on Blue Sky or Threads, though. If you find me there, it's probably like broadcast only, like this is what's happening. I'm most active on Instagram, and I do have a Facebook author page.
All right. I think most authors seem to be more active on Instagram than anywhere else. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Twitter was just not a happy place after a while. Like it was just
No,
time
and
to
I
go.
think between now and November it's going to be even less happy, I think.
Yeah,
Sad.
I was very relieved when I deleted my account.
I hear that so often. Alex, thank you so much for joining me. I've
Oh,
had
thank
such a
you.
great time.
This is
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.